Next up, we affectionately call this young man Uncle Dr. Brown. So Uncle Dr. Brown, we have adopted him, Miss Paula and I. He's our uncle, no one else's. Mr. Irvin, Dr. Irvin's journey has now led him to partner with state and national offices in advising legislation for diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. He enjoys collaborating with teams and closing the opportunity gaps for Brown and Black students and other marginalized populations to create safe, inclusive learning cultures for all learners. And he's just amazing, and you're gonna find out why. So at this time, take it away, Dr. Irvin Brown.
Come on, Uncle Brown. Come on, Uncle.
Thank you so much, Imani and Paula. So now I have to live up to all that hype. So, yep, thank you for doing that. We're going to jump right into this. And so let me go ahead and share my screen with everyone. Okay, I think we're there. So thank you again for the introduction. I really do appreciate that. And as we have already laid the foundation, I definitely would like to say thank you to IDA here in Oregon on behalf of our president, Danielle Thompson, and of course, the board members and the advisory council. We greet you from the beautiful Pacific Northwest. And a foundation has been laid for us, and we're just going to keep building right on that. One of the things that I believe in is celebrating people, celebrating ourselves. And right now we know we sit in the middle of Women's History Month. And so having said that, I think it's vital. I think it's vital that we look at those individuals who have paved the way for us and definitely come to a place where we can celebrate our accomplishments. So having said that, come on and celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. I got to bring my screen back up here for a second. The foundation for us today is understanding the politics of strange truth, learning how to navigate through sophisticated racism. And our focus will be a cradle to career, look like, feel like, and sound like. I'm a firm believer that we have to take a look at our research. This is what the experts tell us. Throughout my presentation, I will pause periodically at each slide just so you can have the opportunity to read the slide, and I will come back and I will glean parts of it just to elaborate. We have so many scholars of color that tell us that our brown and Black students, our students in the BIPOC community, they have to learn how to navigate through all controlled white spaces. They have to learn it on their own just to be academically successful, emotionally healthy, and to maintain a positive racial identity. They have to learn this on their own. It's not taught in the classroom. They have to figure it out. Testing by fire. Our young people have to learn how to navigate through all controlled white spaces on their own. I know some of you may be thinking like, wow, Dr. Brown, wow, Irvin, you're just going to go right there. Yes, I am going to go right there because that's where we live today. That's where we sit. That's where we breathe. That's where we sing. That's where we dance. We live in a place today where we have to learn how to navigate through some spaces that were not meant for us to be in. I firmly believe that we have to listen to our students. We have to hear what our students are saying. We have to know that their lived experience says it all. Andre tells us this: one of the ways that I deal with racism in my classroom, in my school, is by isolation. I just go into my room to be by myself and just clear my mind and try to not think of it. Andre is navigating through a sophisticated system, and his tool of choice is isolation. For the people of color that are on this call, that isolation for us, we call it racial oppression. The young generation, they just choose to withdraw, and it comes out in a variety of forms. Something has to be said for the gift of storytelling. And we find storytelling in critical race theory. We find it there. We find it because those experts, whether it's Crenshaw, Ogbu, Tatum, those experts tell us that when Trajan feels the way that he feels, he says the best way of getting through it is to forget it never even happened, because nobody else really cares. Now, mind you, this is not an adult talking. This is a young person. This is one of our students. This is a young man of color. And what does the research say when you look at the lived experience from our students of color? When our students walk into a classroom, when they walk onto that school campus, if they are unseen, invisible, sometimes even hyper visible, if they're not validated because of the school's racialized climate, it does in fact impact not only their academic performance, their self-esteem, self-efficacy, their worth, their emotional stability, their physical health. And over time, our experts would tell us the physical health, we know that that will turn into RBF, also known as racial battle fatigue. Today, we are giving you tools, just as you have heard from Ms. Conroy and of course, Ms. Lucas Hall. We're giving you tools that your young people will know how to implement and to use every day. And for you as a parent, it's important that you have the tools also. So what are the tools that we need to cultivate literacy at home, in the middle of a pandemic, and also in the classroom? What tools do you have on hand? And what are some ones that you're willing to learn today? Here's one of those tools. I'm a firm believer that our children need to see themselves in the book. They need to see themselves. They need to see themselves in a positive light. They need to see themselves from the beginning of the book to the end of the book. They need to be affirmed in their identity. Our young people need to love all parts of them. They need to love the texture of their hair. They need to love the shininess of their face. They need to love their beautiful skin. And our young people today do not see enough of themselves in the literature, and nor are there enough adults to teach them about that literature that look like us, that look like me. Here's a second tool. You've already heard this addressed by Ms. Sherry. To briefly touch on it, we have permission from Nancy Young to use this today. And we know that 60 to 65% of our learners, they benefit and grow when they have a structured literacy approach. 60 to 65% of our learners, they not only understand, but they grow. This level of scaffolding that takes place in the classroom, this level of having a great and positive literacy approach, it does things differently. Comprehension is one thing, but knowing how to use the word, knowing how to say the word, that is not easy for a lot of our young people. So we got to go back into the classroom and we got to change some things. We have to unlearn some things. We have to do some things differently if we're going to expect a different outcome. And I'm a firm believer, you'll hear me say that a lot today. I'm a firm believer that before I go forward, let me take a look behind me. Let me take a look back as to see what's happened already. I got to look back. And when I decide to look back, I think about Sankofa. Sankofa, to go, to fetch, to go back and get what our ancestors laid behind, to take a different look at it. And if we're going to look back from what we left, I'm a firm believer that we can do better for tomorrow. Looking back, take a look at this map. For many of you today, this map may look familiar. For some of us, it may not look familiar. Here is a map. Notice the green, notice the blue, the yellow, and the red. The blue is the desired place to live. It's the desired place to live if you were white. The red is where someone that looks like me, in the skin that I am in the role that I play, the red was where I lived. We call that redlining. Redlining came to be in the 30s. President Roosevelt. It was a part of the New Deal. The New Deal where people that looked like me were left out of the deal. It was a deal to where the FHA, they decided to combine with HOLC, with the Homeowners Loaning Association. They combined together to build suburbs, to build developments. And these developments were the blue, the green. Those developments were strictly for white people. And they only had one requirement. Just do not sell any of those homes to Black people. No African Americans could live there. Redlining. Someone may be thinking, well, Irvin, that took place 50 years ago. Irvin, that has no place today. Really? Redlining did something in America that's painful for a lot of people to talk about. Redlining allowed institutional racism to become cemented into the very fabric of this country. Redlining did that. Where I could live dictated how successful I could become. And it was a practice that was implemented by the government, cemented into the fabric of this country. And when we think about redlining increases the home value for some, and for others that look like me, it lowered the home value. Because what we know about redlining destroyed a lot of wealth. It destroyed a lot of wealth for Black and brown people. And that wealth was used to better others. In this country, there is a wealth gap. It's obvious, it's there. The wealth that we could have had does not compare with the wealth of the dominant voice, because redlining not only impacted our families, but it impacted the schools that were in our neighborhood. The value of our homes matters. And why would I say that? Because of taxes. And typically, families choose to relocate based upon the schools, based upon the ranking of the schools. Redlining and the ramifications of it still linger in America today. This gap is very wide. 10 times greater than that of an African-American Black family. 10 times greater in 2016, that's just a few years ago. 17,000 compared to 170,000? I didn't make that up. The racial wealth gap, it's real and it's felt. In 2019, a white family had 8 times the wealth of a family that looked like me. Just 2 years ago, 8 times the wealth. In The Color of Law, Richard Rothstein says this, and if it's unconstitutional, then we have an obligation to remedy it, to fix it. If we put something in place that jeopardizes the academic success and attainment for our brown and Black students, we have to fix it. We have to do something about it. You may ask, you say, well, Irvin, who's the we? The we is inclusive of the dominant voice, our white brothers and sisters, who consider themselves to be allies, consider themselves to be those individuals that are in the fire with us. And I'm a firm believer that if you're going to be in this with us, then let's take an honest perspective about where we live and the zip codes. Take a moment, locate your state. As you locate your state, you'll notice that there are some numbers above your state or right on your state. That is the amount of spending per student that the government uses every year, per student. For some states, it's a lot. For some states, it's not enough. Per student. It puts things in a proper perspective when you understand our train of thinking and how we got to be where we're at. Housing policy is education policy. The housing laws that were put into place decades ago, we are still living and feeling the ramifications of that. A reflective indicator of education quality is our housing policy and the opportunities and resources available to our neighborhood schools, So in essence, the more taxes you pay, the less teacher turnover rate in that school. The more taxes you pay, the better the schools, the more interventions that students will have in those schools. In many cases, our students attend schools they have been zoned into based upon the zip codes of where they live. Are zip codes a predictor to a child's academic success? The answer is yes. It does determine a child's success, a child of color success. How do we navigate through a system that is very, very sophisticated? Some researchers found out in Montgomery County, Maryland, low-income students, randomly selected, were put into a wealthier neighborhood, and they performed better on their standardized test than low-income students who attended their schools in a low-income neighborhood. I think that gives us reasons to pause, to reflect, to take an honest perspective as to where we live, and to look at our country, to look at the educational system. Where in the educational system does it need to be tweaked? What needs to change in order for all kids to succeed, in order for all kids to learn, in order for all kids to read? Where should we start? And depending on where I start, also depends upon the skin that I'm in. I have to take a look at the skin that I am in. And I got to understand that there is a system that is in play. And there's a system that was created, designed for me to fail. I have to know that. That's not negative thinking. That's the truth. For many of us on this call, we probably have heard of NAPE. And what is NAPE? NAPE, the National Association of Educational Progress, came around about in the late 60s, 1969, and an assessment geared toward our young people in 4th grade and 8th grade. It was a sampling of students from 4, 8, and 12, basically to have a snapshot of their learning, just to see how well we were progressing. Not all students take the NAPE. This was a test just so our educational experts can see where are the gaps, where are they? And when a child takes this assessment, the results are either they're basic, proficient, or advanced. Now, please take a moment to locate your state. Locate your state. The NAPE is given every 2 years. So we're going to look at some data from 2019. So take a look at where your state is, and please take note of all the way to Mississippi to take a look as to why are they there by themselves? What did they do differently? I'm going to share with you what they did differently. It's already been mentioned here today, but let's unpack it just a little bit more. The most important factor to student success is the teacher. Hands down, it's the teacher. We can prepare all of our students to walk into the classroom. We can buy them their backpack. We can buy them new clothes, and we can encourage them. We can lift them up with all the best self-esteem possible. But programs do not teach a child. Teachers do. And when you look at what our teachers are receiving in their practicum, when they're teaching, there are some materials that are left out. Not all practicum instruction has phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Not all do. So when a teacher is paying good money to become a good teacher, that teacher does not have all the tools to reach all students. Let me say that again. That teacher does not have all the tools to reach all students. Here's letters. And what is letters? Language essentials for teachers of reading and spelling. This is the science of reading. This is the why and the how of reading. It's both. It's the why, the reason behind it, the staple, the signature, and it's also the how. How do I do this? How do I climb up those ladders? How do I build literacy instruction so my students can learn? Well, Mississippi, they utilize letters, and it dramatically, it catapulted their students to the next level. And letters has 4 beautiful pillars. I've already mentioned the science of reading. It transforms instruction. I want to pick up one more just to kind of give it a little bit of extra. It's enhancing teacher effectiveness. I'm a firm believer that you can have letters. You can have all the beautiful programs. You can have the teachers who are paying good money to get that education degree. You can have all of that. I'm also a firm believer that if a teacher does not understand the culture of where our brown and black students come from, they won't be able to connect with our students. Let me say it this way. If you're going to teach me, you must first know how to reach me. If you're going to teach me, if I'm a child of color, you need to know that my culture matters to me. And when you tell me, teacher, to check my culture at the door, that's a problem. When you tell me, teacher, that my hair isn't beautiful, or when you decide to get some scissors and cut it off, that's problematic for me. Because now you have put more racial oppression on top of me. Now I'm living out microaggressions because you have invalidated my culture. You have jeopardized my learning. The classroom is a place where students must be educated to see themselves not only in the text, but to see themselves being successful in the adults and the models around them. And how do we do that? Great question. I'm so glad you asked. When I think about letters, I also believe this. If you're going to teach any program to reach our kids who have a learning difference, to reach our kids who will grow and advance through dyslexia, I also believe that our teachers need to understand critical race theory. They need to understand the intersectionality of how biases come out when a teacher teaches. For example, for those of us in our brown and black skin, we understand what code switching means. We understand what it means to assimilate. We understand that. Our encouragement to our teachers, our white teachers, our allies, is that when you decide to utilize any program to reach our students, please include some cultural pedagogy. Please include being culturally relevant. Please include understanding the biases that you will or may bring into the classroom. And please understand how that impacts a child's learning. Reach me before you teach me. Speaking as someone that grew up down south, I am one of 7 children. Those are my parents right there. Born in the beautiful Pelican state of Louisiana. And I had many siblings that worked with me when I was a child. And I could not read well. I could not pronounce the words. I couldn't say them the right way. And I was bullied all the way from kindergarten to high school. My parents decided to tell my older siblings, hey, Irvin needs to know how to read. So they created flashcards for me. It's kind of old school, but that's what they did. They created flashcards so I could read. Because with the speech impediment that I had and still have, I had to practice new ways. I have to practice new ways to read the written text. So my parents, although my dad is a self-made man, he had to quit school while he was in the 6th grade just to take care of his family. And my mom had some college. Had it not been for my parents who had the determination in the scheme that they were in as Black parents to push me forward, I would not be here today. So my plea to all teachers is that before you teach me, please reach me. When we take a look at NAPE, NAPE tells us this. Just a couple years ago, there were not a lot of shining stars. There were not a lot of beautiful examples of states that really excelled. There were not. In 2019, 66% of our 4th grade students are not proficient readers. 66% are not proficient. Just 2 years ago. Just 2 years ago. So you have to ask yourself, are we making progress? 31 states performed worse in 8th grade reading than they did in 2017. We're making little to no progress. I know for many, this may seem like doom and gloom. This is the reality. This is what it takes to look back over our shoulders and say, hey, let's look at our history. And this is what NAPE tells us. The reading scores for African American, Black, and white students at grade 4 were low, very low. In 2019, the average scores for African American, Black, and white 4th graders were not significantly different from their scores a decade ago. 10 years ago, the scores are not better. That's the reality. That's the shared truth. And as we take a look back, I'm a firm believer that history speaks loud and clear. I will allow these numbers and stats to speak for themselves. We talk so much about the achievement gap. We talk so much about the opportunity gap. And I'm a firm believer that if you're going to talk about the gap, and if you're going to come up with solutions as how to close it, before you come up with some solutions, can we please take a look at our history to see how did we get here? How did we get here to the place where we don't have a lot of Black teachers. How did we get here, Irvin? I'm glad you asked. Because Brown versus the Board of Education. Before Brown, we had 82,000 Black, beautiful teachers, superintendents, principals, 82,000. That's a lot. 9 years after Brown, 38,000 lost their jobs. Why did they lose their jobs? They lost their jobs because when our Black boys and girls walked into the classroom, the laws, the policies slammed the door for our Black teachers. So when we talk about the gap that we're in today, let's understand how we got the gap. This is the birthing of the gap. Again, I will allow the stats to speak for themselves. When we think about this gap, 1984, 1989, over 21,000 of our Black teachers were displaced. 21,000. 21,000. That's a lot. This is not a part of my assignment today, but when you look at the decade of the 80s and you have to ask yourself, well, Irvin, how did we get there? You have to understand Reaganomics. And I'm not going to talk about Reaganomics today because I know I'll probably offend someone, but that's okay. But when you understand Reaganomics and you understand that there were people in the government that had a war on crime, it was a war on Black people. Because after the decade of the 80s, we incarcerated over 1 million brown and Black men. We put them away. We put them away, and many of them are still there today. So that gap was done with intentionality. That gap was done to hurt kids of color. And 20 years have passed by, and we have still shown little progress in closing that gap. History speaks loud and clear. Do we hear it? Our examples of teachers of color are few. Little progress has been made to close the gap. Again, taking a look back to move forward, to understand how we got here, I think it's important that we understand literacy and the power of the spoken word, but also the power of the written word. If we're going to understand this achievement gap, we have to take an honest perspective. We have to use an equity lens to understand that there were slave codes. We had an American legal system, institutional racism, which we'll hear more about today, that was put in place. We had things done on purpose just to preserve whiteness. Booker T. Washington. The issue that the campaign of whites trained others with the belief that if African Americans, Blacks, or Negroes were educated, then their economic value would decrease. In essence, if a Black person could read, they would lose their value. They would want to up and leave. And we could read the story of Nat Turner to understand that. Looking back to move forward. If Black people were educated, they would leave the plantation, they would leave the farm. Because why? They were on. Historically speaking, we know that after the Dred Scott decision, we were not citizens. We were not seen as a being, a human being. We were not seen as that. Does that still linger today of not being seen, of being less than? Does it still play out into the classroom? As we heard earlier from some moms, yes, it still plays out in the classroom. Based on that decision, Black people, we were not a citizen at all. And this was connected and tied to race, power, and racialization. When you have race and power together, not only will you have oppression, but you will have racism. And this is what they thought of people that looked like me. We weren't human. We were a strange fruit with interrupted possibilities. Our lives were cut short. That is what history tells us. One of my favorite actresses of all time was Miss Cicely Tyson, who recently transitioned. She said that as Black people, we are not on the shoulders of our ancestors. No, we're not on their shoulders. We're on their backs. And I believe that. We stand on the backs of our forefathers and foremothers who paved the way for us. Again, understanding the ability to read, what it meant. And if you were a slave, it meant that you could be intellectually free. Nothing could hold you back and nothing could hold you down if you could read. There were laws in place that limited what we could do, purposely done. And if you were a white person, if you were found out that you were teaching a Black person to read, you could be fined, you could be put in prison. And if you were a Black person that was learning how to read, not only could you lose your life, but parts of your body would be cut off. History speaks loud and clear. This is what Frederick Douglass heard from his white master. That Frederick Douglass would at once become unmanageable and of no value. Reading is crucial. Reading is important. Reading frees our students' mind in their ability. It unchains their soul. Once our young people understand our history, how we got to be in the place we're at, does this painful yet truthful past impact my now? Does it still play out? We're freshly coming from 2020. The answer is yes. And the data speaks for itself. Children of color are targeted by discriminatory school discipline. SROs in the building. We're creating a cradle to prison pipeline. Cradle to prison pipeline. Every 43 seconds in 2018, a child or teen was arrested. And children of color were nearly twice as the amount as a white child being arrested. More. That breaks my heart. A Black child is arrested every 2 minutes. A Black child is suspended every 4 seconds in a 180-day school year. In a normal year. They drop out every 53 seconds. Again, allowing the data to speak for itself. Understanding how we got here. Knowing what it takes to navigate through a sophisticated system. If we're going to be successful today and tomorrow, we have to understand how we got here. And it's important for our kids of color to know their history, to know that we're standing on the backs of the greatest people that walk the face of this planet. History speaks to us. And in my closing, my why, and everyone needs a why. You need a why to do what you do. You need a why. My why is this. I know for a fact, because I've lived it, that there is no ethnic group that is excluded more from this beautiful educational system than an African-American male. I know that. So today, as you learn and as you take notes, as you visit, as you share, as you laugh, as you embrace, let's continue to strive to always be our best self. For you and for me and for everyone else. Okay, I think that's it. So let's check back in. Stop sharing. Okay, can you hear me?
Thank you, Uncle Dr. Irvin Brown. Y'all, that's really my uncle for real in real life. He dropped some jewels, some knowledge, some history. And again, if we want to understand where we're going, we have to understand where we've been.